In the unforgiving New Mexico territory, Billy the Kid's unwavering trust in an old alliance walks his most loyal brother, Tom O'Folliard, into a deadly trap set by Pat Garrett, forever staining the high desert soil with betrayal. The wind carried the taste of copper and dried sage across the high desert of Fort Sumner. It was a land skinned alive by the sun, where shadows were the only refuge. Billy Bonney sat on a weathered crate outside a negligible adobe shack, cleaning a Colt 44. The metal was hot against his calloused thumb. He didn't look up as Tom O'Folliard rode in, his horse lathered in sweat that smelled sour and exhausted. Tom dismounted, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with heavy, tired thuds. He slapped dust from his canvas duster, a cloud rising like phantom smoke around him. "The air feels thin, kid," Tom said, his voice gravelly from lack of water. He nodded toward the horizon, where heat haze shimmered like a mirage of water that never arrived. "Too quiet out there, like the territory is holding its breath, waiting for something to break." Billy slid the cylinder back into the Colt with a sharp, metallic clack. He looked up, his blue eyes startlingly clear amidst the grime of the trail. "It's just dirt until blood makes it land, Tom. Right now, it's just dirt." Billy pulled a heavy silver pocket watch from his vest, the object representing his autonomy, his borrowed time. He snapped it open, checked the sun against the dial, and snapped it shut. "Garrett's ghosting around White Oaks. We're clear here for a spell." They sat in the shade of the porch, drinking coffee thick as mud from tin cups that burned their lips. The silence between them was comfortable, forged in years of shared danger. Across the yard, a lone, stunted cottonwood tree struggled against the arid climate, its few leaves rattling like dry bones in the breeze, the recurring symbol of natural persistence. Tom watched it. He had a bad feeling settled deep in his gut, a cold stone swallowed days ago. He trusted Billy with his life, had done so a dozen times, but Billy trusted the world too much sometimes. Billy believed the code of the West meant something to everyone. Tom knew better. Later that afternoon, a rider approached, a slip of a boy nervously clutching the reins of a staggering mare. He stood at the edge of their camp, terrified by the reputation of the men before him. He held out a sealed envelope. Billy took it, his movements deceptive, lazy on the surface, coiled underneath. He tore the wax seal. The paper was thick, expensive, a texture that didn't belong out here. "It's from Charlie," Billy said, a grin splitting his boyish face. "Says the heat's off in Lincoln. Says Garrett moved south towards Cruces. Charlie's got a buyer for that herd near the Bosque Redondo. Easy money, Tom. Christmas money." Tom leaned back against the adobe wall, the rough texture snagging his shirt. He didn't like it. Charlie Baudra was good people, but Charlie talked too much when the whiskey flowed. "Garrett moving south don't feel right, Billy. Pat don't give up ground unless he's circling around behind you." "You're seeing ghosts, hermano," Billy laughed, standing up and stretching. The sun caught the silver conchos on his chaps. "Pat's a hound, but he ain't a magician. We ride at first light. We meet Charlie. We get paid. We winter in Mexico." Tom didn't argue. You didn't argue with a thunderstorm. He just watched Billy walk away toward the makeshift corral. Tom looked back at the struggling cottonwood tree. A single yellowed leaf detached itself and fluttered to the dry earth. The leaf settled onto the cracked soil with a silence so absolute it felt like a deafening roar in Tom's ears. A final punctuation mark on a conversation that hadn't even reached its true conclusion. He stayed rooted to the spot, his calloused hands instinctively wandering to the rough sun-bleached fabric of his vest, feeling the heavy stillness of the New Mexico air press against his lungs like a physical weight. Billy's silhouette moved with a fluid, terrifying confidence toward the corral, his spurs singing a rhythmic, metallic song against the hardpan that spoke of a man who believed he could outrun fate itself. The smell of horse sweat, dry manure, and the lingering bitter tang of the morning's overboiled coffee hung in the heat, thickening the atmosphere until every breath felt like swallowing the desert whole. Tom knew that Billy's trust was a wildfire, beautiful to behold and warm to be near, but utterly indifferent to what it consumed in its path to keep burning. The cottonwood tree stood as a twisted monument to stubbornness, its bark deeply ridged and grey like the skin of an ancient lizard, a living testament to the struggle for autonomy in a land that demanded total submission. Tom stepped closer, his boots crunching on the parched earth, and placed a hand against the trunk. The wood was surprisingly hot, vibrating with the unseen effort of drawing life from a depth no man could see. This tree was their frontier, a boundary between the safety of the shadows and the exposed vulnerability of the trail that lay ahead. Yet it offered no real protection, only the illusion of a sanctuary. He thought of the silver pocket watch Billy carried, that shining piece of clockwork that pretended time could be measured and owned, while here, under the indifferent sun, time was only measured in the slow death of leaves and the sharpening of a man's survival instinct. The wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the adobe walls nearby, carrying the faint metallic scent of distant rain that would never fall, a cruel joke played by the horizon on those desperate enough to believe in it. The silence that followed Billy's departure was a living thing. A predator crouched in the corners of the makeshift corral, where the horses shifted uneasily, their nostrils flaring at scents Tom couldn't yet perceive. He began to check his gear with a slow, practiced deliberation, the texture of the oiled leather holsters and the cold, heavy steel of his Winchester providing a grounding reality against the ethereal dread blooming in his chest. Every buckle fastened and every cinch tightened felt like a door closing on the life they had led before this moment, a slow progression toward a threshold from which there was no returning. He looked at the horizon, where the mountains sat like jagged teeth against a sky so blue it looked bruised, and he realized that Billy's charisma was a thunderstorm that provided light, but ultimately left the world darker once the flash had passed. He didn't move to follow just yet. He simply watched the dust settled by Billy's boots, wondering if the land was already preparing to swallow their footprints as if they had never existed at all. He noticed. The journey toward Bosque Redondo was a punishing ride through purgatory. The sun was an arrogant hammer beating down on their shoulders. The heat was aggressive. It sucked the moisture from their eyes and throats. They rode in silence mostly, the only sounds the rhythmic jingle of spurs, the creak of saddle leather, and the synchronized breathing of their mounts. The landscape was vast and indifferent, a sprawling canvas of ochre dust and sharp volcanic rock. Midday on the second day, they crested a rise and stopped abruptly. Below them, in a dry wash, a hunting party of Mescalero Apache sat their ponies watching. There were 6 of them, painted for the hunt, not war, but their presence was a sharp current of electricity in the stagnant air. Their leader, a man with a face like a dried riverbed and eyes that held ancient, hard knowledge, raised a hand, palm out. Tom instinctively reached for his Winchester. Billy's hand shot out, gripping Tom's wrist with surprising strength. "Easy," Billy murmured. "We're guests in their house." Luddy, the sun was a white-hot eye staring down from a cloudless sky, baking the dust until it smelled of scorched minerals and old bone. Billy's fingers were like iron bands around Tom's wrist, the heat of his skin transferring through the salt-crusted sleeve of Tom's duster, a tactile reminder of the living blood still pumping through them both. Below them, the Mescalero ponies didn't shift or stamp. They stood as still as the boulders surrounding the wash, their dark coats matted with the fine red silt of the New Mexico territory. The scent of the hunting party drifted up on a stray current of air, a sharp, pungent mix of animal fat, sage smoke, and the raw, iron-like smell of fresh-killed pronghorn strapped to a pack horse. Tom's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs, a bird trapped in a cage of bone, while the silence of the desert seemed to expand, stretching the seconds into a long, agonizing wire that threatened to snap with the slightest movement. The Apache leader remained motionless, a figure carved from the very obsidian and clay of the land he claimed as his own. His raised palm was a physical barrier, an invisible fence line drawn in the shimmering heat haze that separated two worlds destined to collide, but currently suspended in a fragile, breathless truce. His face, etched with lines as deep and permanent as the arroyos carved by centuries of flash floods, showed no fear, only a profound, unsettling recognition of the ghosts that trailed behind the two outlaws. Billy let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since they left the Bosque Grande, his own hand slowly opening in a mirroring gesture of peace that felt both heavy and hollow in the face of such ancient authority. Around them, the recurring symbol of the desert, the thorny, resilient cholla cactus, seemed to lean away from the heat, its barbed arms reaching for a shadow that was nowhere to be found in the punishing midday glare, a silent witness to the tension of the frontier. As the leader lowered his hand, he made a sharp, guttural sound that caused the other 5 riders to bank their horses with a synchronized grace that made the outlaws feel clumsy and exposed in their heavy, sweat-stained saddles. They didn't ride away so much as they were absorbed by the landscape, their silhouettes flickering through the distorted air of the wash until only the dust remained, hanging suspended like powdered glass in the stagnant air. Billy finally released Tom's wrist, leaving pale imprints on the tanned, sun-beaten skin, a silent mark of a brother's intervention that had just saved them from a shallow, unmarked grave. The silence that returned was different than before. It was no longer empty, but filled with the weight of a warning that neither man knew how to translate, a cold ripple in a world made of fire. Tom looked down at his Winchester, the cold steel feeling strangely alien in his grip, and realized that out here, the law wasn't written in books or enforced by tin stars, but was a living, breathing thing that demanded a respect Billy was perhaps too willing to give. They watched. Billy rode forward slowly, hands visible near his saddle horn, palms up. He spoke in broken Spanish, mixed with the few Apache words he knew. He offered tobacco from his pouch. The leader accepted it without smiling. The Apache gaze shifted from Billy to Tom, then toward the horizon where Fort Sumner lay hidden. The leader made a sharp, cutting gesture with his hand across his chest, then pointed toward the ground, a sign of ending, a sign of burial. The Apache turned their ponies silently, the hooves making almost no noise on the hardpan, vanishing into the shimmering heat haze as if they had dissolved. "What did he say?" Tom asked, the sweat cold on his neck despite the oven-like heat. Billy stared at the space where they had been. He rubbed the silver pocket watch in his vest. "Said the soil ahead is hungry. Said the coyote is waiting." Billy spat on the ground. "Old wives' tales. They just don't want us spooking the game." But Billy didn't believe his own words. The air felt heavier now. They pushed on as dusk began to bleed purple and crimson across the sky. The temperature plummeted rapidly, the brutal heat replaced by a biting cold that sliced through their dusters. They neared the outskirts of Fort Sumner. The town looked abandoned in the twilight, a collection of jagged silhouettes against the dying light. The smell changed. The purity of the desert was replaced by the scent of civilization. Stale wood smoke, manure, and the faint metallic tang of coal oil lamps. They stopped at the edge of town, facing the threshold of the main street, the physical boundary representing their final choice. Beyond that invisible line lay the promise of easy money and the lurking shadow of Pat Garrett. "We don't have to go in tonight, Billy," Tom urged, his breath pluming in the freezing air. "Let's camp on the ridge, scope it out." Billy shook his head, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of the cantina where Charlie was supposed to be. His trust in his friend was an anchor pulling him forward. "Charlie's waiting. A hot meal and whiskey sounds better than freezing my ass off out here." Billy spurred his horse forward, crossing the threshold. Tom hesitated for a single heartbeat, looked back at the empty desert one last time, and followed his brother into the dark. They watched. Fort Sumner was a ghost town of locked doors and shuttered windows. The biting cold had driven everyone indoors. The silence was unnatural. It was a thick wool blanket pressing down on the streets. The only sound was the crunch of their horses' hooves on the half-frozen mud. The air smelled intensely of burning pinon wood from hidden hearths, a cozy smell that felt alien and threatening out here in the exposed street. They approached the old hospital building, which had been converted into housing. A warm yellow light spilled from a single window, cutting a sharp geometric shape onto the dark ground. Billy swung down from his saddle, his movements cat-like even in the heavy winter gear. Tom dismounted slower, his eyes scanning the deep shadows between the buildings. Every instinct screamed at him to remount and ride hell for leather back to the open range. "Charlie!" Billy called out softly, approaching the door. The wood was rough, peeling paint under his gloved hand. The door didn't open. Instead, a voice boomed from the oppressive darkness to their left, from the deep shadow of a porch awning. It was a voice they both knew, a voice that used to share their campfires. "Right there's fine, kid." Pat Garrett's voice was flat, devoid of the warmth it once held. It was the voice of the law now, cold and final as a judge's gavel. Time seemed to warp. Billy froze, his hand hovering inches from his gun belt. The betrayal hit him harder than a bullet. He had trusted the intel, he had trusted the location, but Tom didn't freeze. Tom O'Folliard, loyal to the last desperate second, moved in front of Billy, trying to shield him, trying to buy him a heartbeat of time. "Pat, don't!" The night erupted. Two muzzle flashes tore open the darkness from Garrett's position. The roar of the shotguns was deafening in the confined space. It wasn't cinematic. It was brutal and quick. Tom jerked violently as the buckshot slammed into his chest. The sound he made was a wet, surprised gasp. He crumbled instantly, falling face first into the freezing mud, his blood already pooling, black in the moonlight, steaming on the cold ground. Billy reacted on pure adrenaline. He didn't return fire. He couldn't see the target. He spun, diving behind the corner of the adobe building as another volley tore up the wood frame where he had been standing a second before. "Tom!" Billy screamed, a raw sound that ripped his throat. Silence slammed back down on the scene, heavier than before. The smoke from the black powder hung thick and sulphurous in the freezing air, burning the lungs. Billy pressed his back against the rough adobe, chest heaving. He listened. He heard the heavy boots of Pat Garrett stepping off the porch onto the crunching gravel. He heard the labored, gurgling breathing of Tom O'Folliard just around the corner. Billy risked a glance. Tom was trying to push himself up, slipping in his own blood. His eyes found Billy's in the dark. There was no accusation in them, only a terrible, fading sadness. Tom's lips moved, trying to form a word, but only blood came out. He slumped back down, his cheek resting against the frozen earth. Garrett advanced slowly, his shotgun reloaded, a towering shadow against the faint light. He stopped over Tom's body, looking down. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a man doing a job he hated, but a job he chose over friendship. Billy looked at the silver watch still clutched in his free hand. The glass face was cracked from his dive against the wall. Time had run out. He looked at his fallen brother, then turned and ran into the black maze of the town, leaving the only man who truly loved him dying in the dirt because Billy trusted the wrong people. She couldn't. The desert was endless and grey under the pre-dawn light. Billy rode without direction, his mind a numb void. He didn't feel the freezing wind cutting through his coat. He didn't feel the exhaustion of the horse beneath him. He only felt the absence at his side. The silence was different now. It wasn't expectant anymore. It was hollow. He found himself days later back near the spot where they had seen the Apache. He hadn't meant to go there, but the land seemed to steer him. He sat under the same stunted cottonwood tree. It looked even barer now, skeletal against the vast, empty sky. He built a small fire, the smoke smelling of dry mesquite. He sat staring into the flames, his eyes burning, but unable to cry. He pulled out the silver pocket watch. It was broken, stopped at the hour of Tom's death. The symbol of his control was shattered. As the sun rose, painting the desert in brutal shades of orange and blood red, Billy realized he wasn't alone. The Apache leader was there, sitting on his pony 50 yards away, just watching. There were no others this time, just the old warrior. Billy didn't move toward his gun. He was too tired. The Apache rode slowly forward and stopped near the small fire. He didn't speak. He looked at Billy, then at the broken watch in his hand, and then at the ground. The warrior reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out a handful of dark, rich earth, not the dry dust of the surface, but soil from deeper down, where moisture still held. He let it trickle slowly through his fingers onto the fire, hissing as it smothered the embers. It was a judgment, a statement that the white man's war, his betrayals, his laws, were just temporary fires on the surface of a land that didn't care. Garrett had the law, Billy had the fame, but Tom had the dirt. The Apache turned and rode away without a backward glance, leaving Billy alone with the dying smoke. Billy stood up. His joints ached with the cold. He looked at the cottonwood tree. It was struggling, but its roots were deep, finding water no one could see. He walked over to the tree and hung the broken silver watch on a low, dead branch. The metal glinted dully in the rising sun. He didn't need it anymore. He wasn't running on borrowed time. He was running on dead time. He mounted his horse, the leather creaking loudly in the absolute silence. He looked back toward Fort Sumner one last time, a hardened resolve settling over his features. The boyish charm was gone, burned away in the flash of Garrett's shotgun. "It's just dirt," Billy whispered to the empty wind, his voice hollowed out, "until blood makes it land." He turned his horse south toward Mexico, toward the inevitable end that was now rushing to meet him. The desert swallowed him whole, a tiny speck of dust moving across an ancient, indifferent landscape.